we were supposed to get with the first group, and somehow we became the first group, which I'm not in love with, but we'll have to see how this works out. All that said, what a gorgeous morning. Could not have asked for a better morning. Just beautiful.
Hello, this is Andrew with MyMillion.bike. Last week I did a video outlining my strategy for doing a long ride. The trigger for that was that this past weekend I participated in the Ride Across Wisconsin RAW event. It's a 225-mile ride that goes from La Crosse, Wisconsin to Green Bay, Wisconsin, that actually turned out to be about 228 miles with the detours that they had to make. I thought it'd be interesting to go through what worked and what didn't work, and then the things that I learned and the observations that I had at the end of what is the most epic thing that I've ever done. The first thing is that I didn't really plan properly for the ride to start on time. And so we barely made the 5 a.m. start. We showed up, got on our bikes, made the start line, listened to them talk just a bit, and then we rode right out of town.
I meant to film the start, but just got there too late. So here we are, being led out of the city of La Crosse. Let's turn that around. Hopefully that got everybody.
Wow.
Got a pretty big group. Surprised how many people are here this morning. Anyway, I should probably focus on not hitting potholes than catching the sun.
The organizers, who did an awesome job all throughout the ride, both from the aid station and the routing and the planning and the marking and everything, just outstanding. They actually led us out of town. It was really nice because they had the traffic blocked off at the stop signs and the stoplights and everything, so very smooth out of town. In my hurry, though, I left my water bottles in the car, which would have been a tragic mistake if not for two things. One, we had arranged for my daughter to drive SAG for the route, and so it was really just a matter of waiting until we could meet up with her at a planned point. And then secondly, a friend of mine loaned me a water bottle so that I could have something to drink. It would have been a really, really short ride otherwise. Another thing is that for the first 35 miles or so, whenever we got to the first aid station, I didn't have any sensor data. I have no idea what happened on the Garmin, but I spent that whole time without any sensor data. Not that it really mattered, because our goal was to get with the first group and just ride at their whatever that pace was and keep with them, and then just kind of figure that out later in the ride if we could, maintain that, or if that was a dangerous thing. When we got to the first aid station, I was able to get back most of my sensor data by stopping the Garmin, turning it off, then turning it on again. I did not get heart rate data until much later in the ride because, oddly enough, the battery had died. It wasn't until about 130 miles in that it occurred to me that maybe I should try to change the battery, because I had just changed it a couple weeks ago, but that was the problem. Fortunately, that was one of the things that we had in the SAG car, so it was just a matter of taking the sensor apart, putting a battery in, and I got that back. But it would have been nice to have heart rate for pacing some of the early portions of the ride. Interestingly enough, we quickly became the first group, and we set the pace for the entire ride except for one little section where the GPX file that I had on my Garmin didn't have a detour through a gravel path through one of the little towns we were riding through. So myself and maybe 2 or 3 other people that were in doing the pulling at the time, we made a wrong turn, so we had to do a little U-turn and then come back. But other than that, we actually led the group the whole ride. At that point, there were about 20, 25 people in the group, and maybe 10 of them were doing the work. And in that early section, which is pretty flat, it was really nice to have that many people working, because we were cruising along at 22, 23 miles an hour. And if you weren't in the front, you weren't working that hard. The first meetup point with the SAG was at the second aid station, which was about 60 miles. And it was at that point that I was able to get my water bottles. And then also get my first double shot of espresso on. After we left the second aid station was when we started doing a rotating pace line. And then that's when we really started amping up the pace of the ride as well. We were doing 26, 28 miles an hour when that was working well. And when that was working well, it was awesome. It was the first time that I've ever done a rotating pace line, and I'm reasonably confident that most of the other people in my planned group, it was the first time they did it as well. So there was a little bit of a learning curve, and when it worked, it was awesome. When we were in sync, it was absolutely brilliant. We just crushed it. But later, when we tried to do it again, it didn't work. And I think part of that could have been terrain. Some of it could have also been that because of the pace that we were able to maintain in the rotating pace line, we ended up whittling the group down quite a lot. And so just having fewer riders in the rotation meant that it just lost its ability for the riders to sync up properly. So we kind of stopped doing that and then went back to a more traditional pace line. But everything was still going great, and we pulled into the third aid station at about 130 miles with an average of 21.7 miles per hour. It was at the third aid station that I finally replaced the battery in my heart rate sensor. Fortunately, this was one of the areas where we had planned to have tools and other things in the SAG car. So one of the bits that was in the toolbox was the CR2032 batteries. Personally, I was doing great up until about mile 188, 189. In anticipation of the aid station that was supposed to be around mile 190 something, I'd finished off my water bottles, and that put me in a really bad place. But it was really a series of tactical errors on my part, which led to me getting dropped for the first time ever that didn't involve a mountain elevation and trying to keep up with the 182-pound pure climber. The first thing that I did wrong was after a long pull, I got in behind the smallest guy in the group, which meant that I was essentially doing the same watts to stay there as I was doing when I was pulling. The second error was that when the pace ramped up a little bit and a gap opened between him and the rider in front of him, I burned a match to cover that, to get into that space. That rider then moved left, taking me out of the draft. I think that his intent, because he wasn't doing work in the group, was that I wanted to move up in front of him. But what it meant is that I had to burn another match. And then the rider in front of him went right and waved me through, which meant I burned a third match to get to third wheel. At that point, I didn't have much left. As hard as I tried, I couldn't hang on to that wheel. And that's when I made the biggest mistake. I thought that I could use that 5 or 10 seconds as I was coming back as a rest and then jump back up to catch the wheels. But I just didn't have it. I couldn't make the jump, and I ended up going out the back. Fortunately, though, I was able to recover enough that I ended up matching their pace about 200-300 feet off the back of the group for the next 7 or 8 miles. I couldn't ever close the gap, but I ended up losing them at a big intersection where they made it through, and then I had to stop for traffic. Fortunately, that's when the 182-pound pure climber, who happened to be riding 200-300 feet off my back, caught up with me. We were able to trade pulls and catch the front group at the aid station, which happened to be at 200 miles. It was at this aid station that I broke the most fundamental rule that I have around cycling nutrition. I ate something that I've never eaten on a ride before, and that was 2 bags of Sun Chips.
200, 22 miles an hour, Sun Chips, French onion, probably not vegan, don't care. Need the salt.
And they were fantastic. It was exactly what I needed because I couldn't take any more sugar, and I needed that salt, and I needed that something in my gut that wasn't a bar or a block. It was also when I had my second double shot of the day, and I want to thank my SAG driver for getting that for me, because I was a new man after that, and it was just fantastic. So when we left the aid station, I was able to get back to work with the main group, and we ended up doing the ride from that aid station through the city of Green Bay. It was about 28 miles with a 22.1 mile per hour average. So one of the things that was kind of interesting is that while it wasn't a race, it certainly felt like a race to me. And that was one of the things that I wanted to get out of this experience. I wanted to experience what it's like to ride on the edge, to get outside of my comfort zone, to get pushed in a way that I would never push myself on a long solo ride, or we might be uncomfortable pushing each other on a friendly group ride. In October, one of the guys I did this with,
You're going to show up in my video now as the Beast.
Thanks.
and I are going to be doing a gravel race out in Iowa. Having this massive foundation of base and the things that we learned on this ride, both from a nutrition and comfort level and all of that stuff, I think will be really, really useful. If it was a race, one of the guys that we picked up, Michael Rycroft, he would have won. He was a machine on this ride. And it was actually him who was doing the pulling when I got dropped. So thanks for that, Michael. As confident as I am in my own training program, at some point I need to reach out to Michael and find out what he does, because I would like to be able to engage beast mode in the same way that he did. Incidentally, he also had what was probably the second nicest bike on the ride, after the tarmac, of course. He had this gorgeous black Pinarello Dogma F12, just absolutely fantastic. As epic as that was for the rest of us, one of the guys who was in our group and working in our group did something which is just, it leaves me speechless. He rode from Madison to La Crosse the day before Raw. Then he did Raw with us. Then he rode from Green Bay back to Madison on day 3. His name is Dave Blodgett. He did that as a fundraiser for Bike Fed, the group that organized the Ride Across Wisconsin. Ride Across Wisconsin is a major fundraiser for them, and he, in order to raise more money for them, he did this just incredible thing. I'm going to put a link to his donation page in the description below. If anyone wants to throw some money at that, I would highly encourage it, because wow, just wow. So what did I learn from this? The first thing that I learned is it's important to show up on time. And on time doesn't mean when the ride starts. It means 15 minutes before the ride starts. Or maybe it means 30 minutes before the ride starts. Don't show up 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Be there before you need to be there. The second thing I learned, and this is obvious, but don't forget your water bottles. Make a checklist of the things that you need to have on your bike before you leave the place that you need to leave with your bike. Part of the problem was that I was rushed. Part of the problem is that I was tired. It was 4:50 in the morning or so, 4:45 in the morning, and I'm just not great at that. So I need to have a plan for what happens in that scenario when I'm tired and I'm rushed and all of that other stuff. The third thing that I learned, and this is probably the most important thing, is that I should probably be using caffeine, which is widely accepted as a safe and legal performance-enhancing drug for cycling, into my nutrition plan on a ride like this. I used to use shot blocks with caffeine, but I kind of cycled off of them because I never needed them. But I think the reason why I never needed them is because I was never pushed to the point where that performance enhancement was something that was required. And it was certainly something that was required on this ride. If I had not experienced what I experienced at mile 188 and then experienced what I experienced at mile 200, I don't know that I would have gotten that. I haven't quite figured out what dosage and duration and timing and all that other stuff, but for the gravel race that's coming up in October, it will definitely be part of the plan. I think that it would be naive of me not to incorporate it. On the flip side, the 182-pound pure climber doesn't agree with me on that, but he doesn't use caffeine ever, really. He doesn't drink coffee or tea or whatever. I drink coffee every day. I am a broken person if I don't. So maybe there's another side to it. Maybe if you don't ever use caffeine, maybe Maybe it's not as essential as I think it is, but I'm reasonably confident that I'm right. And the final thing that I learned is that you need to know your limitations. The things that have always worked for me at mile 50, mile 100, mile 150 might not work at mile 188. I don't have I can't keep reaching for more and expect it to be there. Part of that means that maybe I don't hit it as hard as I did earlier in the ride. I don't know. And it's something that's really hard to plan for because you don't know what's going to happen. And I've never ridden 188 miles before. And finally, the observations. And this is something that I checked with the other guys in the group, and they all have this. We have been crazy hungry the last few days. I've been eating continuously. And at meals where I would normally have, 1.5, maybe 2 servings, I've been having like 3 or 3.5. That's something that's interesting, and it probably indicates that we just burned so many calories, and just our bodies are just trying to claw that back. The next thing is that bike fit is super important. If you have a niggle that shows up on a normal ride, on a ride of this duration, it's going to kill you. Whether that's in pain or discomfort, or could possibly also manifest in left-right balance. One of my friends had a pretty skewed left-right balance on this ride, and he suspects that it has to do with some metatarsal issues that he needs to get around to correcting with one of his feet. At the end of the ride, I was honestly surprised at how good I felt. I think part of that was being on top of nutrition the whole ride. And then part of that also was that it's highly likely that I was still feeling the impact of the double shot of espresso. I think that while I didn't want to, and I was happy for the ride to be over, if it had been another 20 miles, I probably could have done that. Although I'm reasonably confident that as we rode our bikes from the end point to the cars, after hanging out and drinking beer for an hour or so, nobody sat in the saddle. I know this turned out to be a really long video. I wish that there was more in the moment video from the ride itself, but unfortunately it's just not something I felt comfortable doing while we were riding at the pace that we were riding at. If you agree, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them below. Thanks for watching. Cheers.